I don't know
Oh, I was
if
planning
everybody
to.
got it.
Yeah.
There's only 8 participants, so maybe they, oh, no,
Well, that's us right now.
yeah, that's just us.
Yeah.
No attendees.
Recording in progress.
Oh,
Okay. Recording is in progress.
be careful what you say.
Yeah, there's some people haven't gotten the word. I don't know
Oh, I was
if
planning
everybody
to.
got it.
Yeah, okay. Well, good evening,
There's only 8
everyone. I'm Tom
participants, so
Boak,
maybe they,
Chairman of the
no,
Kennebunkport Planning Board. It's a
Well, that's
virtual
us right
planning
now.
board meeting
yeah, that's just
using
us.
Zoom conferencing. The agenda is out on the town's website, and
Recording in progress.
the
Oh,
Zoom
Recording
ID
is in
is
progress.
811-2934-1357.
Careful what you say.
And as always, it's on
There's some
channel
people haven't gotten the word.
1301, or can be streamed through YouTube at Kennebunkport Television. Okay. During the meeting,
Well,
only
good
the
evening,
members of the
everyone.
planning board and
Tom
current
Boak, Chairman of
participants
the
are selected
Kennebunkport
by the
Planning
board.
Board. It's a virtual
All other
planning board
participants
meeting
will be blacked out
using
and
Zoom
audio
conferencing.
muted.
The agenda is
So,
out on the town's website.
I have
And
an important announcement.
the Zoom
let me
ID
just
is
do attendance first.
811-2934-1357.
Okay,
George and
as
John are
always
not
expected,
on,
but I see everybody else,
Channel
so why don't we just
1301, or
call the roll
streamed
once.
through YouTube
I'm here.
at Kennebunkport Television.
Nina,
I'm here.
During the meeting,
Okay.
only the members of the
Ed,
planning board and
here.
current participants
Scott,
are selected by the
here.
board. All
And
other
Larry.
participants will be blacked
Here.
out. And
Okay,
audio
so we're
muted.
good.
So
The
Uh,
minutes of the last
I
meeting.
have an important announcement. Let me
I move to accept the minutes as read.
Second,
George and John are not
Okay.
excited, but I see
So I'm in
everybody
favor.
else, so why
Nina?
don't we just
In favor.
Call the roll once.
I'm
Scott.
here.
Nina,
In favor.
I'm here.
Ed,
In favor?
okay, Larry, Ed,
in favor.
Here?
okay. Well, that brings
Here.
us to the agenda.
And
Now, Larry,
Here.
let
Okay,
me
so we're
first
good.
ask how many participants we currently
the
have.
minutes of the last meeting.
David?
15 attendees. I move
So,
to accept the minutes
Okay, thank you.
as read.
All right.
Second,
We, the first
Okay.
item on the,
So I'm
on
in
the
favor.
docket tonight
In
is
favor.
15 Langsford Road. So let me
Scott.
read you this letter
In
that
favor.
I just received.
In favor?
The whole
In
planning
favor.
board received it, but it's
Okay.
addressed to me.
Well, that brings us
Anyway,
to the
dear Tom,
agenda.
now, thank you for your
The,
time and
Let
consideration
me
during the
first
January
ask
5th
how many
planning board
participants
meeting
we currently
of
have.
our application for conditional
David?
use approval for
15
property at
attendees.
15 Langsford Road. During the meeting
Okay,
and since
thank you.
that time, we have received
All
some
right.
questions
We-
from the board
First item
about our
on the-
application
on the,
and have read
docket
many
tonight
comments
is
and questions
15
submitted
Langsford
by
Road.
abutters
So let me
and
read you
neighbors
this
about the
letter that I
proposed
just
use.
received.
We are still reviewing and
The
working
whole
through
planning board
those
received it, but
questions
it's
and
addressed to
letters as
me.
they relate to
Anyway,
the
dear
proposed
Tom,
use.
Thank you
And
for
will
your
need
time and
additional time to
consideration
best
during the
address the
January
concerns
5th planning
based
board
on
meeting of our application for conditional use approval
raised in
property
connection
at
with
15
the
Langsford
application.
Road,
At this
Langsford
point,
Road.
we
During the
therefore
meeting
elect
and since
to
that
withdraw
time, we have
our
received some
application
questions
from the
planning
planning board.
board
Accordingly,
about our application.
based on this
and have read
withdrawal, we
many
will not be
comments and
at
questions
the planning
submitted by
board meeting
abutters and
tonight.
neighbors about the proposed
So,
use.
And
We're still reviewing and working through those questions. and letters as they
agenda has
relate
been
to the
updated
proposed
to
use,
reflect that. It says
and will need
canceled.
additional time to
It
best
says,
address the
withdrawn.
concerns
So,
based on
that's the news.
On-
I want to thank all of the
raised in
people who wrote letters.
connection with the
We had-
application. At this
I
point,
think
we
I counted
therefore
22
elect to
separate-
withdraw our application.
30.
No, there were more than that.
I counted
Accordingly,
30. I made a
Based
spreadsheet.
on this withdrawal,
Okay,
we will
well,
not
see,
be
I only,
at the planning board meeting.
I may have counted, a couple came in on more
So,
than one email with 2 letters on it and stuff like that. So
The
Tom, I
the,
think we need
agenda
to
has
point
been
out
updated to
that
reflect
this is
that.
an
It says
application
canceled.
that's been withdrawn, not
withdrawn. Yes,
postponed. It
Right.
has
Well,
ended.
that's the news. It has been,
I
it
wanna
has
thank
been
all of
withdrawn.
the
I think
people who
they
wrote
said that in
letters.
their letter.
We had,
Yes.
But yes,
I
it is
think I
gone.
counted
This
22
application is
separate-
dead. But I want to thank
No,
No, there
everybody
were
who
more than
sent
that.
I counted 30. I
the
made a
letters.
spreadsheet.
That is just
Okay,
fantastic.
well, see,
We
I
got,
only-
as I may have counted, a couple 30 unique letters. Each one was a separate letter with information in
Tom,
it.
I
So a
think
little bit
we
of
need to
information
point
in
out
each.
that
So
this
it's,
is an
you know, it was
application
very well
that's
thought
been
out, folks.
withdrawn,
Thank you.
not
Yes.
postponed. It
Right.
is
So we'll
ended.
see what happens next. But it has been withdrawn. For now, there's no, that meeting is not happening. It is gone.
Tom,
This
Tom, it
application
means,
is
so
dead.
that
But I
doesn't
wanna
mean
thank
it's
everybody
conclusive
who
and that they
sent
won't reapproach.
the
the board
letter.
again.
That is
Accurate.
just fantastic. That is correct. You know, you never know if they'll send it in again. Unique letters, each one. And trying to answer
But-
some of those questions, but that's up to them. They
But
did
Tom,
not.
Tom, I would-
So it's, you know, it was very well thought
I
out.
think you really
Thank
need to
you.
clarify for people, because some people may
So we'll
not
see what
understand.
happens next.
Withdrawn is not
For now,
postponed.
there's no.
This
correct.
application
Meeting
is
not
ended.
happening.
If they
Tom,
file a
Tom, it
new
means, so that
application,
doesn't mean it's
then
conclusive and that
letters,
they
if
won't
you,
reapproach.
if
the board
people
again.
did not like
They
that
would-
application, they would
That is
have to
correct.
send letters
You never
again.
know if they'll send it in again.
They would not be, you know, you could copy the
Trying to
letters,
answer
but
some
they
of
would
those
not be a
questions, but
part of the new
That's up to
application.
them. They've,
But
they
Tom-
did not.
Tom,
Yeah,
I would-
that's important.
I think you really
Okay,
need to
wow.
clarify for people,
Well
because some
put.
people may not understand.
So anyway,
Withdrawn
that,
is
that
not
certainly
postponed.
shortens our
This
meeting tonight, I
application is
believe.
ended. If they
We'll see.
file
Okay.
a new
Item
application,
2 is
then
100
letters,
Oak
if
Ridge
you,
Road. And I
if
guess we
people
need
did
to
not
bring
like that
in,
application, they would have to send
Mr.
letters
McKellar?
again.
I got the name right this time?
They would not be, you know, you could copy the letters, but they would not be a part of the new application.
Correct. Is he out there? That's important.
Yes. His hand is raised.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he is out there.
Well
Could
put.
promote him, please. So anyway, that certainly shortens our meeting tonight, I believe.
We'll see.
Okay. Item 2 is 100 Oak Ridge Road, and I guess we need to bring in
NPLC.
Mr. McKellar. I got the name right this time?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Sorry.
We can. Out there?
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know my cam. Oh, I'll start
Yeah,
video
he's-
as well. There
he's
we go.
out there.
Could promote him, please. All right. I think the first order of business for us is to address the letter that Werner sent us on this, on what we should be doing relative to this
NPLC.
application.
Sure.
So, Werner, I guess got
Yeah, can you hear me now?
clarification.
Sorry.
We can. Got some answers from
I don't know my
The,
cam. I'll start video as well. There we go.
from the. All right, whatever.
I think,
The first order of business for
Attorney?
us is to.
Yeah,
address
so-
the main
so I-
attorney that,
I can
Werner
speak to that,
sent us, please.
you know, a little bit, just to, you know,
On this-
kind of
on
summarize what it,
what
you know,
we
what
should-
the
what should
position
we
is.
should
So
be
at the
doing
last
relative to
meeting,
this
the board,
application.
you know, wanted to better understand, you know, a little bit of, you know,
Werner,
of
I
what a
guess got
process would look like,
Clarification.
along with
got
just,
some
you know,
answers from
understanding, you know, the
the,
planning board's authority, code
the
officer authority, you know, and just
name,
how this
whatever,
type of, you know,
Attorney?
arguably
so-
a unique
so I-
request, what that
I
looks
can speak
like,
to
you know,
that,
relative to
please.
statute.
You know, a little bit just to.
And so, based on that request, I reached out
at
to
the last meeting,
Maine Municipal Association,
board,
that has a staff of attorneys,
you know, a
you know,
little
that
bit
are
of,
available
you know,
to answer just these
of what
types
a
of
process would
questions.
look
And
like,
so, as opposed to
along with
sending
just,
you
you
all
know,
all the email
understanding, you know, the planning
correspondence,
board's
I
authority,
decided to just put it in the form of
code
a
officer
memo where
authority,
that just
you know, and just
that
how
kind of
this type
outlined and
of,
quoted the
you know,
the
arguably a
conversation.
unique request.
And so I'll
you know, relative to
just
statute.
give you know a
And so,
summary of
Based
what
on that,
the you know of what the
request, I reached
position
out to
you know
Maine
is
Municipal
that is
Association,
how I understand it is
you know,
that
has a staff
is
of
that the statute
attorneys,
you know
that
of course
are
there's always
available to answer
disclaimers
just
in
these
terms
types
of
questions.
interpretation,
And
but
so, as
you know the
opposed to sending
statute
you all
as it
all
relates
the
to
email
you know the
correspondence,
subdivision
I
component
decided
piece.
to just put it in the
Uh,
form of a memo where
The
just
Maine
that
municipal
kind of
attorney took
outlined
the
and quoted
position
the,
that modification to that you know
the
of a
conversation.
subdivision you know
And
related
so I'll
specifically to the
I'll
original
just
applicant
give
and not
you know, a
necessarily
summary
any
of-
you know
of
any
what the,
subsequent
of what the position
owners
you
of
know,
property
is
afterwards.
is how I understand it,
Unless
is that
you know the town
that
had
the statute,
established
you know,
you know
of course, there's
some other
always
type of
disclaimers in terms of
process you know
interpretation,
related
but,
to that, which
you know the
you
statute.
know what I
as
took
it relates
that to
to,
understand
you know,
is that you know the
subdivision
town
component
has
piece,
established a we have a separate subdivision regulation
the position that
that governs your individual performance standards as well as the review process.
and not
So
necessarily
keep in mind that
any
statute doesn't
subsequent,
necessarily require that a town
owners of
have that.
property afterwards.
It
Unless,
defines what a subdivision
the town
is,
had established,
and then it says planning
some other
board,
type of process,
it's your,
related to that.
which your authority to review
what I took that to
land
understand is
divisions
that,
that
the
qualify
town has
under the,
established
under the
a,
definition of
a
subdivision.
we
So
have a
statute
separate
doesn't,
subdivision
doesn't spell out process,
that governs
procedure,
your
or
individual
necessarily
performance
individual
standards as well as the
performance
review
standards.
process.
So
keep in mind
so
that
because we do
statute
have a,
doesn't
we do have a
necessarily
process
require
where we
that a town
identify
have
minor
that.
and major,
It just
defines what a
and,
subdivision is.
and
The
then it
attorney
says
from Maine
planning
Municipal,
board,
it's your,
we
seem to be in agreement that
your
because the
authority to
town has a separate
review,
process, that it is
land
appropriate to
divisions that
review
qualify under
this
the,
particular
under the definition
request
of
as a
subdivision.
minor
So
revision
statute doesn't,
to a
doesn't spell
previously
out
approved
process,
subdivision.
procedure, or necessarily individual performance
So basically,
standards.
that puts it
So-
in the hands of the board.
So because we do have a,
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I think I read your memo differently, so I read that we could determine
Yeah.
whether
Right.
it
That's
should
right.
be in
Yep.
the hands of the board or it should be in the hands of code enforcement.
So
That's
we-
correct. Yes. I mean, the
We
attorney,
could throw it back to you.
you could defer, you could just make a decision that, that this application could be reviewed, by the code enforcement officer. And I think that would also be consistent with statute.
I
Well-
thought the letter put a twist on the whole subdivision word that I hadn't really thought through before, in that I read that letter to say that the statute is worried about an instance of the subdivision process. That the plan documents the process and the intended results of the process. And if within 5 years a change were made by the original subdivider, then that needs to be reviewed and considered in light of whether it's allowed or not. But after that 5-year clock has run out, the statute says, all right, the subdivision process has run its course. Now those lots are individually owned, and if you come back in 10 years and somebody wants to change one of them, it's not the Fox Run subdivision, but rather it's a new subdivision process instance that has been started. So I think we're at the point here where the clock has run on that original subdivision. It occurred more. It was subdivided more than 5 years ago. And the question is, are we required to have purview over decisions made to that original plan, or has the clock expired on that? That's how I read it.
I think there's another factor in there that hasn't been brought in. And this subdivision doesn't have one, but there's a declaration for homeowners. And that's a contract between the homeowners. And if you have that in a subdivision and it affects the land at all, and even if the 5-year clock is run out, I think then that somebody has to look at that contract, and it's possibly the planning board that has to look at that contract if it's affected.
I agree, somebody has to.
Yeah.
And maybe in Kennebunkport, the useful way to do that is to have the planning board look at it. I don't have a problem doing that.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking
You're right.
ahead.
But if you
If
look,
that's something we haven't come up to.
But that covenant is actually, it's not a separate document, but if you look at the deed, there are restrictions that are put on every one of the deeds of those lots, including lot 4.
Mhm.
It does not say you can't subdivide further. It might have said that, but it doesn't. It does say you can only put one house on it. But I don't think that that's the business that we're in. I think that's a deed restriction that needs to be grappled with, but by whatever lawyer does the work of crafting a deed for this new lot that is envisioned.
Well, a violation of the deed restriction wouldn't come to the planning board. It would go to the town or a previous owner.
Well-
And the code enforcement office would have to look at that.
Comment on that, Werner?
Sure, and I'll just go a little further is that, and only in so much that it's that it relates to a zoning issue, so for example, if there's a deed restriction that says, every house has to be brick,
Yeah.
then that's not a zoning violation if somebody puts up a house that is vinyl, as an example. That's a private civil matter that has, is not within the scope of the code enforcement office to enforce.
So somebody would have to bring them to court on a civil matter.
Be a civil matter at that point.
I wouldn't want that to be the planning board either.
No.
Okay.
Right.
So I think my concerns about what I read in the deed and how that would be constructed, I think all of that was taken care of by the letter that you copied us on, Werner. And I'm happy with Nina's thought that said it still might be useful for us to look at these things, and we have a tradition of looking at them, but insofar as it needs to satisfy the main statutes, it does, if in fact the 5-year clock has been expired.
Well, I didn't say I was in favor of looking at it. I'm perfectly willing, and I think the letter read that way, that we could hand it right back over to Werner. And I was going to say, if there's a deed restriction that he has to look at, then maybe he should look at the whole thing together, both issues. And it would probably be faster for the McKellars too.
At this point, but I don't want to say in this meeting that these items shouldn't come to the planning board in the future. I think we had an opportunity to look at this specific one. We can determine that this specific one goes back to code enforcement. There's nothing of interest because we've done the research, but I think it's not a bad practice to have it come to planning board in the future for changes, minor though they may be. The only question is do we want to charge landowners the cost of coming to the planning board? Is it worth it? You take my point?
Well, yeah, no, that's a valid question, and so it is helpful, it's helpful for me to have guidance in terms of understanding, what it is that you do want to see, for that exact reason.
Yeah.
It just helps folks plan things out a little bit better, to know, what to expect. So, and, in that regard, again, I think my process would still be the same, something like this comes forward again, I would still put it forward to the planning board.
Okay.
If anything, just to, create the documentation. So, for example, if the question, say that a title attorney on a future sale of the property says, and does a title search and says, wait a minute, I've got, a piece here and a piece here, and has a question in terms of how that all came about. At least having documentation in your minutes, it brings closure to that question at that point.
It's a very good point. I like that argument. Okay, so there is value for money then.
There is.
Yeah.
Do you want closure in the minutes, or do you want an actual letter?
I think a letter.
I either way is fine. I mean, I think, having it in the minutes is something that goes in the file. But certainly, a memo coming from the planning board, is also a good practice to have, that way.
Referencing this
right.
This research and saying, so we chose to turn it back to you.
Yeah, I think because you could have a memo or a reference like that, you could record it at the registry of deeds, and then it would be very clear to anyone in the future that we turned it back over to you.
Oh.
That's what I'm saying, make a record there.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So that would be a finding of facts even of some sort.
Well, yeah, not necessarily a findings, but just a memo.
Just a determination.
Yep.
that since
Right.
the subdivision is over 5 years,
Yep.
in existence, and the original owner is not, is not the person coming before the board, that the question of moving the I don't want to say borders, but property lines, property lines is one for the code enforcement office, and not for, on the basis of a memo from the MMA, and we can reference that.
At the risk of throwing a twist on here, the only thing I saw in the deed that I worried about was this access to common land. And whether or not that caused any problems with going forward, whether the new lot that was formed had that access or not. And that would be something for some attorney to sort.
Well, actually, the new lot is being removed from.
I
Right,
understand. So maybe it would,
So it's
Not
not part of, it wouldn't be subject to that anymore, right? I
right.
would
Right.
think.
one might
Yeah.
presume that, but someone else might presume otherwise, right? That was all I'm saying. Those are the nuances that, again, are not really of the purview of the planning board.
Well, that's more in the
Nor
purview of how
purview
the attorney writes the new deeds.
That's right. That's right.
Right,
So again, why it's probably good to be on the record with a determination.
okay. So,
Want to take a whack at that? Nina, are you?
it's acceptable to me to write a letter, and maybe to even include the MMA memo that gets recorded.
Yeah.
In the registry, so for the future, people know why we did what we did. And I think it's faster and simpler for the applicant too. Then he can go directly to you, and you can look at any zoning issues or whatever, and give approval or non-approval. Do we need a motion for that?
Yes.
Does anyone want to discuss it anymore?
No.
No, okay. Well, I'll make a motion that, since I was supposed to be, I think, the case manager, I write a letter of
second it.
determination. Okay.
Oh, that's great.
Okay,
You okay with that? Yeah.
okay.
One last thing, right, Mr. McKellar?
That's right.
You don't have
That's
to
okay.
pay for any more, come before us and listen to us
I
discuss
know
all
you
this.
still got work.
Yeah, and if you,
Okay,
since you kicked it out to the planning board, if you want to refund me any fees I've paid, I'm fine.
Oh, we never refund. We never refund.
She didn't charge you for the letter yet. Be careful.
I spoke too soon.
Nina is a lawyer. You really got to be careful
Right.
by background.
Okay, Tom, do you want to take a vote?
Yes. Did somebody second it?
Yes, Scott
I
did.
did.
Scott
Okay,
seconded it.
Scott, thank you. Well, okay. I'm in favor. Nina,
In favor.
Scott,
In favor.
Ed,
Yes, in favor.
Larry.
In favor.
It's unanimous. Okay, now is there one signature on this or five?
So I think that, process-wise, we can handle it similarly as to the way we do the letters for applicants for subdivision, where we send them, where we make reference to a preliminary approval as they go
Right,
forward.
okay.
As they
So
go forward.
Just a letter from me or Nina is adequate then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
And the minutes will reflect that we
minutes
unanimously
will-
approve this process.
yeah.
Right.
Correct.
I'll draft something and send it over to you, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Alrighty.
All right.
So.
Thank you, guys. Thank you
Mr.
very much.
McKellar.
Warner, thanks for doing
You just
all
have
the
to deal
research.
with Warner from now on.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
Oh, goodness. That's okay with me.
Okay, thank you.
You're in
All
good
right, thanks a
hands.
lot.
Okay,
Good luck.
bye. Okay, our final item is the Mills Road development, and it's being presented presumably by Mike, excuse me, Mike Tadimo. We just call him Mike, but anyway, from Teradyne Inc. So it's Michael Tadima Wyland. Okay,
And remind me, Tom, this is a sketch plan? Is that what?
this is a sketch plan, yes. So, Mike, why don't you take it away? Do you have anybody else to bring in, or is it just you?
I do. It would be, I think it would be helpful if Jeff Bowley is in the meeting as well. If you could promote him, he's the applicant here. Here's Jeff.
Okay, good.
And if I could share my screen, I think that would be
good.
helpful as well. Let's see here. Okay. So can everyone see my screen here?
Yes.
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
Well, good evening. Thanks for having us. I'm Mike Tadima Wieland from Teradyne Consultants. And I'm here with Jeff Bowley, who is the applicant here.
Hello.
The two of us were before you a few years back. For at least several of you were on the board at the time for Binnacle Hill and for Binnacle 2. And we're back with another project that Jeff's proposing, kind of in the same neighborhood. So this is Mills Road. What you're looking at is kind of a site inventory plan, I guess. It's the outer boundary of the parcel here is kind of the darker line. The project, just to sort of get your bearings, the parcel directly to the east is the resort at Goose Rocks, which is a condo development. And across the street, across Mills Road to the south is Sandy Pines Campground. So this parcel, it's entirely undeveloped, it's forested. It's 75 acres in size. It's characterized, if you were to walk around this parcel, you'd notice sort of ledge outcroppings, and so high areas, some of which with ledge outcroppings, and then lower areas in between. And a lot of those low areas have freshwater wetlands in them. So what you see here, the areas shaded in green are upland, and the areas that are not shaded are wetland areas. And so, very early on, we realized we better study this parcel and understand what are the natural resources out there, what needs to be, what's developable, what's not developable, and where do we need to make sure we're protecting either natural resources or habitat. So over the course of the last year, I guess we've done several studies on this site, one of which was a wetland study that resulted in the delineation that you see here on this plan. At the same time, a vernal pool study was undertaken by the same folks at Longview Partners. And there were two vernal pools that were determined to meet the significance criteria of the DEP, and that, I'm sure many of you know this, but just to remind you, that means, in the springtime, the wetland scientists counted a certain number of egg masses for, salamanders or wood frogs. And so they're identified as I guess, effective breeding habitat for some of these species. So the two significant vernal pools, one is located in the eastern corner of the site, and the other one up in the northern extents of the site, right on the property line, actually. And so what you see here is you see the vernal pool, and then these rings that are around the vernal pool, the significant vernal pools, those are 250-foot habitat areas. That's what DEP defines as a critical habitat for these vernal pools. And so the third step we took out here to really understand the parcel was to contact the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and they're the keepers of the database on endangered and threatened species in the state. So we reached out to them and asked them to review their data to see if there was anything we needed to be aware of, and they did. They came back and they said, well, yeah, actually this area has been identified, this general area, not necessarily this site, but this general area has been identified as habitat for spotted turtles, which is a state threatened species. And some of you will remember that was also identified on Binnacle Hill Phase 2. It's kind of similar land in that you've got these sort of upland outcroppings and connected wetlands and such, and some vernal pools sprinkled in. So we engaged a specialist, a turtle specialist, to go out there and set traps, and he conducted a spotted turtle study, in accordance with procedures recommended by Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. And they did identify, he was able to catch one spotted turtle, and it was in this northern corner of the site. So he identified some habitat there in the sort of extreme northern corner of the site, and then he recommended, based on that, in the surrounding area, that this area, that this northern corner of the parcel, be preserved and protected and remain undeveloped, to sort of protect that habitat for the spotted turtle. So after all that, what we have is sort of a constraints map where we've identified wetlands, we've identified vernal pool habitat, and then we've identified spotted turtle habitat. So it sort of leaves you this area shaded in green as area that's developable. It's upland and it's not near some of these protected habitats. So with that, and with the help of the folks over at Aceto Landscape Architects, we developed the sketch plan that was submitted to you. So the plan, it contains, there's really three pieces to this. There's these community uses that are down near Mills Road, and I'll touch on those in a second. There are what we're calling cottage homes, sort of in the central area of the site, and there is kind of a big upland area here that we wanted to take advantage of. So it's very dense. These cottage homes are developed around sort of a common green, if you will. And again, they're year-round. These would be year-round homes, and the roads would be designed to, a typical street standard paved roads. Some of these houses might have detached or maybe attached garages to them, and it would be, a little community. Probably, I think we're targeting. I think this plan. Let me just check my notes here. So we're looking at 9 to 12 of these cottage homes. And then the third piece of this plan are the woodland homes located sort of scattered through the northern reaches of the developable area. And these are seasonal homes. They're tucked away in the woods. They're obviously more remote. There's more privacy, and they're accessed by this sort of this network of gravel roads, narrower gravel roads that are, you know, the idea is that they would be accessed primarily by pedestrians or you know, golf carts or that sort of thing. And to go along with that, we're looking at you know, parking for these folks, and you know, potentially a garage structure for some of them down at the southern end of the Woodland Homes. So the Woodland Homes would number somewhere between 12 and 15. So in total, you know, you're looking at somewhere between 21 and 27 total residential units. In the community uses, would be, you know, this is an early concept, I will say. So the community uses, you know, the ideas are community building, you know, pool, potentially a restaurant, a gym. So those are the types of uses that are proposed at this point, which is, again, just a kind of a rough concept. One thing I will note is, and I forgot to mention, this site, the majority of this site is in the Free Enterprise District, but the area within 500 feet of Mills Road, which gets you to about here, which is between the community uses and the cottage homes, the area within 500 feet of Mills Road is in the Goose Rock zone. And after this sketch plan was submitted, you know, we doing a little more research into the zoning and the ordinance. We realized that a lot of these community uses, certainly a restaurant and anything that would be accessible to the public, would not be allowed in the Goose Rock zone. So, you know, the next version of this plan will likely see these community uses pushed farther into the site, into the Free Enterprise District, because they are allowed in the Free Enterprise, but they are not allowed in the Goose Rock zone. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about it tonight. These uses will move farther back into the site, where they're allowed uses. So, you know, our goals tonight are, I really have 3 goals tonight. And so one of them, this is a bit of a non-traditional development. So I want to sort of confirm that the ordinance, both the land use ordinance and the subdivision ordinance, allows for this type or this style of development. You know, it's not a traditional, you know, single family residential development where we've got 40,000 square foot lots. The second thing I want to talk about is I've identified one aspect that would require a waiver from the design guidelines. So I want to talk about that and just get your input on that. And then finally, I want to hear other feedback, any other feedback you have before we really get too far into the design and come back with a preliminary subdivision plan. So number one, you know, when it comes to how does this fit into the land use ordinance and the subdivision ordinance, I think there are 2 possibilities, but I would like to hear your thoughts on that. I think the first possibility is this is a condominium. So, you know, all the land is under common ownership. Each of the buildings themselves, you know, these are, even the cottage homes, and I'll try to zoom in a little to these areas. These cottage homes they're detached, right? So each structure would be owned separately, you know, as well as any accessory structures like a garage potentially, or maybe those are limited common elements. But and each owner would probably have some limited area around their unit where, you know, they would landscape and have the ability to do what they wanted to with their yard and such. But everything else would be under common ownership, and it would be a condominium. So that's one possibility, and I don't see anything in the ordinance related to that. So I just want to sort of confirm that that's a possibility. And then the second possibility would be to develop this under the cluster provisions, the standards in Article 7 of the land use ordinance, section 7.4. And under those, we would be, you know, drawing lot lines around all these all these structures, all these residential units, and of course they would have greatly reduced lot sizes and setbacks and such, which of course that sort of thing is allowed under those cluster standards. So so that's my first goal, is to sort of understand the board's, you know, how the board views this, and if those are both options, you know, which one the board might like to see. The second thing I want to talk about is the one of the design guidelines in the subdivision ordinance. It says that any project with 20 or more units, residential units, requires 2 points of access onto a road. In this case, Mills Road, or maybe some other road. You know, we're talking again 21 to 27, somewhere in that range. So more than 20 units, but clearly this there's really is no opportunity to have a second point of access. The roads would be designed obviously to accommodate emergency vehicles. There's loops within. There will be loops within this development. So you know, it's not a dead end road per se, but there is just one point of access on the Mills Road. So I'd like to hear the board's take on that, and whether or not you know, a waiver could be a possibility for a project like this. And then again, finally, we just want to hear your first thoughts on this. This is the first time you've seen it. So, you know, any take you have would be appreciated, so we can incorporate any thoughts into the next round. So I think that's all I have for you. So with that, I'll turn it back for discussion and questions. Thanks.
Okay. I notice on the drawing you have up now, that red area labeled septic envelope. Are you expecting to have a shared septic in some way?
Yes. So that's a great question. One other thing or study we undertook on this project was to go do some test pits and determine suitability of soils for wastewater disposal. This project will have on-site wastewater disposal and on-site wells. There's seasonal water, I believe, in the area. There's not year-round water, and there's no sewer in this area. So that is an area that we've identified as having soils that could support wastewater disposal. And yes, the idea would be to do a shared wastewater disposal systems.
And shared wells down there, or separate wells?
So we're not there yet. I think likely it would be shared wells. You know, I don't think there will be 20 plus wells out here at the end of the day. I just don't think that would make sense.
That I don't know the details entirely on condo versus cluster, but it sounds to me more like a condo if you're sharing a lot of things like water and sewer.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Oh, let me just go around the board. And I mean, Werner, do you have any comments or questions on this?
Sorry, I was muted there. So definitely, a unique concept and application here. I think that the board, in looking at this, you would be looking at this, under the cluster provisions of the ordinance is where this type of design wants to be reviewed, as well as the subdivision regulations. The common ownership element, so the condominium form of ownership, where it's for all practical purposes we have one lot that's this common ownership, is a way to that, in conjunction with the clustering, is one way to alleviate some of the issues with individual lot lines, and also deals with some of the common infrastructure elements, like shared water, and shared septic sites. When you're doing individual lots per se, so individual ownership, the ordinance doesn't look favorably on easement areas for individual septic sites. But if something like this comes forward as a condominium form of ownership, then arguably you don't have any type of you're not placing easements on any adjacent properties or anything, in that matter. I think the items that that Mike has pointed out are good questions that we'll need to grapple with. The community uses piece, I think it's a good recognition that the restaurant, I think in particular, would be something that would need to be located within the free enterprise zone. We do have some, there has been, historical discussion by previous planning boards about, how we deal with common amenity, type buildings. What do we call those? Are they considered accessory to the residential, or are they their own separate use? And so those documents I can provide to you all. This was when Old Port Village, CDMK, went through its approval process, and it had a similar development plan where you had buildings that were intended as common amenity type buildings, intended solely for the subdivision. So I can provide that those opinions to the board and to the applicant, because I think it'll be relevant for this case here. So that's my initial feedback to this. It is it's a unique development idea, because it is I see it as it's a clustering of single families. These aren't multifamily units. I think it is something that the clustering provisions could anticipate.
Okay. Nina, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I took a look at this property, and I guess I don't agree with you on some of the ways that you've looked at it. Going to the GIS maps, I see streams in there, and you're very close to the Batson River and other, important streams. You're in the Goose Rocks area, which of course has problems with water contamination. But the thing that bothers me a lot is that, I see a plot here. The whole plot is described as Lyman type soils. And with all those wetlands, I find it myself being very skeptical that all of that is Lyman type soils. I think there should be some scantics in there too. I think those have been wetlands for a long time, and I'd urge you to review that. I'm not at all in favor of restaurants in this area open to the public, because you're right across from the Sandy Pines Campground. And of course, one way to make a restaurant work is to invite everybody over. And they'd be going, they'd be going up through, if you put them in where the cottage homes are, they'd be going up through that area. And, you'd have a lot of traffic back and forth across Mills Road. People say, oh, forget about cooking supper on the campground. Let's not make a fire and just go over to the restaurant. So I'm not really in favor of buildings that are open to the public. If you're going to have a community building, it should be for community only. And frankly, restaurants and community buildings don't always work that well. You don't get enough restaurant goers basically to handle it. I'm concerned about the habitat. Is any of this, by the way, workforce housing? Did you intend for it to be workforce housing, or are you planning more expensive homes?
I don't think it would be workforce housing.
Okay, so it's not going to be affordable stuff. It's going to be condos that are a little more expensive than that. I have a problem with the one road going in there, just one road for all those homes. And I think it could make traffic problems. You have people constantly coming in and out of that road. I'm very concerned about the fact that this is sensitive habitat, and, one, I would never want to see ATVs in there. They go right through vernal pools. People don't care. They, ride right over seedling trees and spotted turtles as well as salamanders. But with that many people in there, you're not going to be able to keep people out of vernal pools. Even if you have passive recreation trails, they're going to be, going up to spotted turtle habitat and to vernal pools. And there's a lot of wetlands in there. Passive recreation trails, people are going to pull out trail bikes, off-road bicycles, things like that. And so I'm very worried about wildlife in there. I'm very worried about bird strikes on these homes. Are you planning to design the windows so that there are overhangs and other types of architectural designs to prevent or at least reduce bird strikes? Are you just planning to have double hung windows with screens on them? I assume you're not going to go and get bird-proof glass. But if you've got a forested area, you're going to have a lot of bird activity. And birds are very good at smashing into windows, especially if you put up these plate glass, windows so they can see the forest and everything. So it concerns me. I guess I'm not against cluster developments. I'm not against developments. It just seems like this is an awful lot of homes for that piece of land. So those are my first thoughts. And I haven't gone through the ordinances to see, can you put in a second road here? Do you need to put in a second road? It's obviously more than 1,000 feet. And even though it loops around, you would need a waiver in there for that much footage. Those are just first thoughts on it.
Thank you.
Hey, Ed?
Yes, yeah, I'm on. Start with what Nina already touched on. I too, and I think you yourself alluded to the fact that the road and the traffic that it would cover is a sensitive area. I think the board's history has been that a fire chief review of that plan has been and will continue to be very important to us. It certainly is to me. And if I look at the road as it is now, you could make the argument that it's got loops and all, but it's got some single points of failure that if that road was blocked in a certain place due to whatever, a tree or a rut or whatever, you'd have isolated some part of the population. So that combined with what Nina brought up, I hadn't thought of, that the use of the restaurant by somebody right across Mill Road, might set you up for a traffic problem. I think a traffic study needs to be part of this, right? Whether or not, given the use, what type of traffic at what times of day and the weekend and season are going to occur. Are you going to need startup acceleration lanes and deceleration lanes? Is there going to need to be a traffic light on Mills Road there? I don't know, but it just, all of those questions will come up, and they're going to come up from the Goose Rocks community as well, not just from the board. So head that off and do an honest look at the traffic study here. I look at the thought of a restaurant there and all, and in general, is parking going to be sufficient? Again, thinking of peak season and what are you really going to do with it? So that type of concern would be there. By the way, let me say from the start, I think it's a very imaginative, creative approach. And just because it hasn't been done before, I certainly don't think that's a reason that it shouldn't be done. Very, very thoughtful and creative. My way of looking at, again, what Nina just mentioned is that that many homes on septic and on wells in this area near the river is a concern. And what would it take for cooperation between the town and the developer to extend the public infrastructure and put all of these homes on a public service? Is that so ridiculously out of the question financially that it can't be pursued? Or is there an opportunity to at least ballpark it and say, hey, here's an opportunity to not only do right by this set of land, but potentially abutters and Sandy Pines and in other areas. So with this big a project, it seems like I would really like to see that done. If you can afford to take a look. And again, I think, Werner, I don't know what the town's openness historically has been to using this as an opportunity to extend the public infrastructure, but it seems like a natural thing to look at, for me to ask for that to be looked at. Let me see, parking sufficiency. What about winter access and snow removal and storage? I think that will come up, and if that could be highlighted at some point, that would be great. And the most general question I have is, how do you see this being run? I'm on South Main Street, and across from me, there's a couple of properties that basically have a management infrastructure, even though it's condominium owned. I think in the Cabot Cove Lodge, I think, Cabot Cove Cottages. Not sure the exact name, but there's a very strong presence and there's a very hefty HOA fee because of that. But if you were going to have community uses that were going to be publicly accessible, I think an on-site presence, a management presence, somebody that saw to the property, maybe even change your opinion on what you do with whether things are landscaped by the owner or you give a common look and feel and you provide that service as part of the HOA. Just a thought that occurred to me as I looked at it. Again, with an eye that said, this is ingenious. And whether it goes forward or not, I think pieces of this are a very future looking forward, and it's a healthy exercise. So thank you for that. That's all I had.
Thank you.
Okay. Larry?
Well, yeah, I just, I'd like to, I guess, reinforce the idea that I think it'd be really useful if you could somehow figure out how to have a looped road. But of course, that's already been mentioned. And I think I know where this area is located. When I drive by there on Mills Road, it seems like is it
does the land fall away there so it appears to be low, or is it substantially high enough that you're certain you're going to be able to drain,
Goes
you
up.
know, rainstorms? So of course, I know we're going to ask for some sort of a drainage study, but it'd be interesting to see where the water drains from in this area. Then my initial perception of this is it's sort of a high density, development, a proposal, and I just I don't know. When I think about the demand for potable water and then sewage, septic, I think I have to agree with Ed that, maybe if you could tie into public services, it might work out better. It might help preserve the area a bit better. And then my other question was, okay, it's kind of interesting that you're proposing the year-round residences toward the front there. Again, that seems like a high-density situation. Are you sure you don't want to just make that into like a single big building, true condo type of development instead of, separate buildings? And then my third question was, the seasonal residences in the back, that's quite interesting. I mean, those seem to be the more desirable areas. I mean, if those are, I guess when you say seasonal, it'll be 3 seasons, right? I guess in winter, you'll have somebody close them all down and drain the pipes and let them freeze up. But anyway, it seems like the 3-season area might be a little more desirable for year-round occupancy than the area in the front that you're showing, the small individual condos. And that's really it. Just sort of a random collection of thoughts there.
Okay. Thank you. Scott, I forgot you.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so just a little bit of what everybody said. I mean, great imagination. I lived in Atlanta for 30 years, and there's a lot of things like this that are going on, and it's really great to see. Obviously the same kind of concerns about those wetlands. I know it's so expensive, obviously, for the sewer, but I mean, it just really seems like the right thing to do is to have, a sewer system. And
Planning board meeting, so can I call you back later? Okay. All right. Bye.
Want to mute, Tom?
And I think one thing I think you've done really, which is great. I don't know how the fire chief would like it, but I do think you really have to have a second way out of there, to not just one entrance and one exit being the same, with, the number of people in there. Really should have an exit out. But the gravel idea is wonderful to kind of look country and Maine. And I don't know what the fire chief would think about all those turns and stuff with a big fire truck. It would have to almost be wider than a regular road because you slide around on gravel. Just a thought, but I mean, it's more pervious. So, I mean, that's better than tar, and it's less expensive, which is, would help you. And I think it looks nicer to the environment too. I think you want to talk to the fire chief about gravel and one entrance and one exit being the same.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So did we hit your three goals? That's
I think so. Yeah, I think my takeaway is kind of like Warner summarized. If this is done sort of obviously under the subdivision ordinance, but also the cluster provisions of the land use ordinance, but done as a condo, it's the concept at least is doable. What I'm hearing regarding the access is it would be really nice to have a second way in and out of here, which I'll try to zoom out again, and there's this frontage on Mills Road and there's no other frontage, so it becomes very difficult surrounded by undeveloped land, with the exception of this condo development to the east, but as you can see, this is an area where we're not, whether or not a connection over there is possible, I have no idea at this point, but certainly bringing a road over there would be great for that vernal pool that we've identified.
well, so that might require so we're saying that the second road or the second access is important for the restaurant concept to be viable because of the cross Mills Road traffic concern, and also potentially for a safety concern, but that the only way that you see right now to get at it is going to require land that is outside of this property to be available via an easement or some other mechanism, and that may not be viable.
Exactly.
Yeah,
unless it's two separate entrances on Mills Road, an in and an out, a little ways apart from each other is at least something.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. If you had, even if they were close together, one for in and one for out, but I do want to point out, I like the clustering of the cottages close together. I don't like things spread out near like wildlife habitat, and I like the condo development idea. It keeps people close in and not so likely to go wandering through the woods and destroying everything, and allows for wildlife to coexist with people. And maybe having a road in and having your couple of condo areas around that and a road out, with clusters closer in towards Mills Road would work, but I don't know where your uplands are and whether that's feasible.
Sure. One thing I heard a couple times the sort of about the density and number of units, and one thing I've heard loud and clear is traffic is a concern, especially with a restaurant or uses available to the public. But one thing I would like to point out, we went through the exercise of calculating net residential area and net residential density, of course, which is kind of step one in a subdivision like this. And I failed to mention this in my presentation earlier, but this, according to the calculations done, in accordance with the ordinance, this piece of land would support 53 units, this 75 acres. So, one thing to keep in mind is this proposal is about half that. So when it comes to, this piece of land, and again, we've identified some areas that need protecting, but the ordinance suggests that this piece of land could support up to 53 units.
Well, I recognize that, but we prefer you didn't do that. At least I prefer you didn't do that.
No,
and as far as the restaurant's concerned, like I said, I'd rather it wasn't public. I'm not so worried about car traffic as I am about people walking across that road from Sandy Pines, especially at night. There are no lights out there.
Understood. well, I think the feedback tonight has been, I think it's been great. A lot for us to think about and put into our next round and our edits, and come back to you with something hopefully more thoughtful and incorporate as many of these suggestions as we can.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can bring your screen down.
All right.
Hey, there we all are. Okay. Well, I guess that you guys have heard what we said and are take it into account. That's the whole reason for sketch plans. So thank you much for preparing a very nice sketch plan for us. And I guess at this point, if someone would like to move adjournment, we can actually adjourn.
I'll move for adjournment.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? I'm in
Aye.
favor.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are
All right.
adjourned.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks.
Good night.